Afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar on points to remember for successful financial management. My name is Angela Wade, and I am one of the trainers here in the Office of the Chief Financial Officer in the Office of Justice Programs. I began my career in the corporate world as an accountant, auditor, and finance manager. For the last 16 years, I have been at OJP teaching grants financial management, reviewing budgets, reviewing grants policies, etc., and overall assisting our grantees with maintaining compliance with OJP grants program. Now, before I continue, I just wanted to let you know that if you have any questions related to just grants or the ASAP system, I do have colleagues that will be available to assist you with any questions or issues that you may be having with those systems. So let's start with an overview of today's session. This session is basically for new grantees or someone who just became responsible for the financial management of a grant within your organization. This is not designed to go into deep detail on grants financial management, but it will provide some initial guidance or pointers to help you get started. It will also give you a basic framework of managing your grant program, which is, again, is useful for someone who's brand new to managing grants, their OJP grant program, or someone that's been here for a while and looking for a refresher. Now, keep in mind, this webinar does not take the place of the two-day financial management seminar or the online training program. We brought back the two-day seminar last year in October after being on hiatus due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The two-day in-person seminar has been temporarily put on hold until February due to the OJP office relocating. Email notifications will go out once registration has opened for the two-day in-person seminar. Until then, you may satisfy your training requirement by taking the online training using the link at the bottom of this screen. Now, once you have satisfied the financial training requirement, it will be good for 3 years. If you are a brand new grantee or you are a new financial manager for your award, then you will have 120 days after acceptance of your new award or taking over as the financial manager to complete the training requirement. So again, this training is designed for those who are new to grants or those who have been working on grants for a while and are looking for a refresher. So let's take a look at some of the topics we're going to cover today. We will start with applicable laws and regulations that basically guide your federal grant program. It is important to know these things before you get started because they will guide you as you begin implementing your particular award. Now, with agency requirements, we will talk about some of the things that you need to have in place as you get started. Again, we will not take a deep dive into detail, but we just want to make sure that you have some of the basics that help you get through the process. The next topic is internal controls. Internal controls, for those people who are in the sports, is like a playbook that shows you how your organization operates. It's always important to have strong internal controls as they show how your organization is run and how you manage your grant funds, and importantly, how your organization is protecting those grant funds from fraud, waste, and abuse. After internal controls will be standards of cost. Now, if you understand the standards of cost and the types of costs, you will have a better idea of what costs are allowable or unallowable to charge to your particular grant program. We will also talk about making changes or modifications to your award. Now, as time progresses, as you're managing your award, it may become necessary for you to make modifications or some changes. So we'll talk about some of those changes. With any of your awards, there are reporting requirements. Some of these requirements are financial, some are programmatic. All are designed to show how you are progressing with your particular award. Our final topic for this session will be a discussion on the single audit requirement, currently referred to as 2 CFR 200 subpart F. Let's go ahead and get started on points to remember. Starting with applicable laws. Now, grant funds are awarded to you to carry out the goals and objectives identified in a grant solicitation. Now, these grant funds are subject to certain regulations, oversight, and audit. They are also governed by provisions of OMB circulars, which dictate how federal funds are administered. Now, grant guidelines have an order of precedence. First in the order of precedence is authorizing legislation. Authorizing legislation are the laws regulating grants set out by Congress. Authorizing legislation is the most important rule in the order of precedence. Authority in regulating grants is the most important rule and an authority in regulating grants, as it supersedes all of the other rules and regulations in the order of precedence, which is why it's number one. It can be vague sometimes, but compliance should be taken seriously. Now, you'll notice as we go down this list of the order of precedence, they become less and less vague because they actually kind of build on one another. Now, second in the order of precedence, federal agency regulation, also known as the Code of Federal Regulations. You would know this as the 2 CFR 200. Now, the Code of Federal Regulations, by definition, is a codification of permanent rules and regulations for reviewing, administering federal grant programs. Now, this is a government-wide rule or a government-wide framework for grants management for non-federal entities receiving federal funding. Basically, the 2 CFR 200 or the Code of Federal Regulations covers all federal grant programs, no matter what agency is issuing your grant. Now, for the 2 CFR 200, again, is for all non-federal entities receiving federal funds. It basically, the 2 CFR 200 will give you a detailed definition of all your grant terms, as well as all the administrative requirements for grants and cooperative agreement recipients, cost principles, and the audit requirements. Now, number 3 in the order of precedence is terms and conditions of the award. All of your OJP awards will have specific rules and guidance for your particular award. These conditions may have additional programmatic requirements, financial requirements, etc., for your particular award. Some of the terms and conditions are based on the program office. Some of them are based on the award itself, but you will have some standard special conditions with any OJP award. Number 4 in the order of precedence is the DOJ Grants Financial Guide. The DOJ Grants Financial Guide should serve as your primary reference or manual for day-to-day financial management of your award. Not only does it have specific requirements for DOJ awards, it also references, as I mentioned, the authorizing legislation, the 2 CFR 200, and the special conditions, which are all higher in the order of precedence. So when we talk about the order of precedence, we're talking about the importance of the rules and how you follow them. So for example, if there is something in the terms and conditions of the award that conflicts with something that's in the authorizing legislation, then the authorizing legislation being higher in the order of precedence will take precedence on that. The 2 CFR 200 I also want to mention was just recently updated. Any changes to that took effect October 1st. Hopefully you've had a chance to sit in on some of our webinars to discuss those changes. And we'll touch on a few of them as we're going throughout this webinar presentation. Next is some of the agency requirements as you're managing your OJP award. All recipients are required to establish and maintain adequate accounting systems and financial records. Now, you should be able to accurately account for funds awarded to you. And in addition, Your records should be auditable. Your system should be able to record and report on the receipt, obligation, and expenditures of your grant funds. This should include recording and documenting the federal funds you've been awarded, your drawdowns, match if you have a match requirement, program income if you've earned program income with your award, subawards, contracts, expenditures, and any equipment you have purchased with grant funds. Part of having this adequate financial management system is having an audit trail. Your system should establish an audit trail. The audit trail verifies and tracks all types of transactions within your organization, your work processes, your accounting details, policies, procedures, etc. The audit trail also includes audit records and documents that explain how your organization is handling its money, which includes your grant money, and it confirms any of the information that you have in your organization's accounting system. The audit trail also includes your receipts, your bank statements, your invoices, etc. All of your documentation. It's very important that you are maintaining documentation as you're managing your award, and not just documentation, plenty of documentation. Your documentation can be electronic or paper, but your documentation should tell the story of what is going on in your organization. So if one of my colleagues or myself came out to your organization, we should be able to look at your documentation and see exactly what you are doing with your grant funds. In addition to establishing an audit trail, you should be able to track each award separately from other awards, grants, or funding sources. Now, although you may not be required to have a separate bank account for each award, unless specifically instructed, you need to make sure your award funds are not mixed or commingled with other funding. In fact, you are prohibited from commingling funds from one program to another. So you want to make sure you're tracking your funding separately from other funding sources. And again, keeping that documentation. Now, your financial management system includes having policies and procedures in place as you're managing your grant program. Now, state and local governments, non-federal entities should be following their own policies. If your organization does not have policies and procedures in place for your grant programs, then you need to follow the federal policies and procedures. We always say you want to follow the policies and procedures that offer the most protection for your federal dollars. Basically, we realized from going out to site visit that the majority of our grantees have policies and procedures that are more restrictive than the federal government anyway. So your financial management system should also have accounting and internal controls in place, basically to ensure that your federal funds that you are receiving are being used efficiently and effectively, and that you are achieving the intended results for your particular program. And also to make sure that you're following the laws and regulations set forth by the federal government for your particular grant program. Again, you want to make sure that all your resources are being protected from fraud, waste, and abuse, and that basically you're following the mission of the Department of Justice as you're managing your particular award. If you are a direct recipient that has subrecipient, it is your responsibility to ensure that your subrecipients has an adequate financial management system as well. Now, your system should also be able to show and compare actual expenditures and costs by your approved budget categories or your approved budgeted amounts. Also, again, you need to make sure you're maintaining that documentation and receipts to support your obligations and your expenditures of federal funds. If you have purchased equipment or property with your grant funds, You want to make sure that you have some kind of inventory control system in place to keep track of that. Again, your system should be set up to show your approved budget by categories along with your corresponding expenditures. That way, you can see how you're spending your grant funds, make sure you're on track with achieving your goals, and then see if you have any variances on how you're expending your funds. Also, your financial system should be able to track any special conditions that have withheld some of your grant funds, to make sure you're able to clear those. And keep in mind, along with this, your financial management system also has reporting requirements. So specifically, I'm referring to your FFR, your federal financial report, which we'll go into a little bit more detail in a few minutes. But the information that you are using to complete that financial report or your FFR report should come directly from your accounting system. So again, if one of my colleagues and myself came out to your organization, we should be able to look at your system and see exactly how you completed that financial report. You should also be able to analyze your transactions to make sure you're charging things appropriately as direct or indirect costs. You want to make sure that the information or the data that is going in your system is accurate so that you're receiving accurate data out of your system to make sure you are processing things appropriately and charging allowable costs. And again, being consistent in charging your direct or indirect cost. So basically, an adequate financial management system should be able to record and report on the receipt, and that's the funds coming into your organizations, and tracking each of your federal awards separately from other awards and other funding sources, your obligations. When you make a commitment to spend funds but have not paid it yet, you should have that tracked in your accounting system as an incurred expense. Expenditures, that is the payment of your obligations, drawing down your grant funds. So now we have a polling question for you. How must award funds be accounted for in a financial management system? Is it A, commingled with prior approval? B, tracked together with similar awards? C, accounted for separately from other award or funding sources? D, there is no federal requirement. So we're going to give you a couple of minutes to answer this polling question. So again, how must award funds be tracked in your financial management system? Is it A, commingled with prior approval? B, tracked together with other or similar awards? Or C, accounted for separately from other award or funding sources? D, there's no federal requirement. So again, we'll give you a couple of minutes to answer that question. Is it A, B, C, or D? Okay. How must award funds be tracked in the financial management system? A, commingled with prior approval. B, tracked with similar awards. C, accounted for separately from other awards or funding sources. D, there is no federal requirement. Okay, let's go ahead and go over the answer. Let's see how many have gotten this. How must award funds keep track of the financial management system? The answer is C, accounted for separately from other awards or funding sources. And it looks like the majority of you guys got it. Yay! Thank you for participating in our poll. Okay, moving on. Internal controls. Internal controls is one of my favorite topics. I could talk about internal controls all day long. Internal controls are those policy procedures within your organization. So let's talk a little bit about internal controls. A lot of times when an organization is first starting up, they had to sit down and decide how their organization is actually going to be ran. So it kind of starts with a vision. What is this organization looking to do? What kind of goals are you trying to achieve as you're running your organization? What is your vision? So that's where you want to start at when you're developing your policies and procedures and internal controls. You need to know the vision of your organization. Once you have that vision, you can sit down and start developing your policy and procedures. What is it you're in business to do, and how are you going to do that? How are you going to accomplish those goals? Then you start writing up those policies and procedures. And then once you have those policies and procedures written up, then you want to sit down and talk to your employees, because you want to make sure they know how this organization is to be run. They know the vision and goals that you have set up to run this particular organization. Once you have that communication out to your staff or employees so they know what their role is in your organization, then you want to make sure you do some kind of risk assessment. The risk assessment is done to make sure you have not left your business or organization vulnerable or open for fraud, waste, or abuse. And also, you want to make sure that those policies and procedures that you wrote up and communicated out to your employees or staff are actually feasible and that they actually work. So the risk assessment is your way of testing them out to make sure your organization is not vulnerable and that everything you have written out actually works and makes sense. Then, if you find discrepancies or holes within your risk assessments, or you see your organization vulnerable in some places, then you want to go back to that vision to make sure you haven't missed anything, and then kind of tweak those policies and procedures. When you've done all that, then you want to make sure you monitor them from time to time. You want to make sure that they're actually being used, followed, and they're actually working. See, because part of that financial management system that I talked about is having strong internal controls in place as you're managing your grant programs and your organization. Those internal controls, as I mentioned, are your written policies and procedures, and they describe your processes for planning, organizing, controlling, reporting on all your organization's operations. Strong internal controls also provides reasonable assurance that you as the award recipient will maintain compliance with all the laws, the statutes and regulations, terms and conditions of your awards. You want to make sure that no one in your organization is bending the rules. Now, part of that strong internal controls is having a segregation of duties. Segregation of duties is vital to having strong internal controls. No one person should be able to control an entire process within your organization. I'm going to say that one more time. No one person should be able to control an entire process within an organization. Having that segregation of duties is intended to help prevent your organization from fraud and error, and again, waste and abuse. You know, I mentioned during my introduction that before OJP, I worked in the corporate world. as an accountant, auditor, and finance manager. Now, when I was in the corporate world, I worked in the accounting department for a large and well-known organization. And 9 times out of 10, this organization is an organization you've probably done business with. I'm not going to say their name though. So this organization has been around for more than 100 years. Huge accounting department. They operate across the United States. They operate internationally as well. They have established policies and procedures, internal controls, the works, everything we've talked about. They had them in place. Now, within this accounting department, they had an accounts payable section. The accounts payable section had an accounts payable director, manager, and a team of accountants that process all the payables within this organization. And they had internal controls in place. And one of the internal controls was that whenever a new account was created, it had to be signed off and approved by the accounts payable manager as well as the accounts payable director. Now, here's the story. The accounts payable director and manager have worked together for years. They had a good camaraderie. So this accounts payable director did not always check behind this accounts payable manager's work. This accounts payable manager set up 3 dummy accounts that was connected to their personal bank account. So then when invoices came in for these 3 dummy accounts, they would be processed like regular invoices. And when they got paid, the money would go directly into the accounts payable manager's bank account. The accounts payable director never signed off, what should I say? The accounts payable director signed off on these accounts, but they never checked it. So months later, after an audit, it was uncovered that this accounts payable manager had embezzled over $500,000 from this company. Now, I'm telling you this story because this was a well-known company. They had audited internal controls and policies and procedures in place, but they didn't follow them all as they should. So it's not only important that you follow your policies and procedures and your internal controls, you need to test them out from time to time to make sure that they actually work. So in addition to this company, when I came to OJP, I went out on a site visit. And one of the things we do on a site visit is we look at the grantees' policies and procedures, especially if they're charging costs to a particular cost category. This particular organization had travel costs associated with their grants. So I wanted to look at their travel policy. Their travel policy had not been updated since the 1970s. So there's no way possible they could have been following their policies and procedures. So I'm telling you this also, again, you need to test your policies and procedures and your internal controls out to make sure that they're actually working. You need to make sure that they are being followed, and you need to update them from time to time to make sure that they are relevant. What you see here are 2 guides that offer information on internal controls. So for some reason, you want to make sure your internal controls are adequate, or you need to go in and update and maybe tweak them a little bit. These 2 books offer some good guidelines and information for updating your internal controls. The first one is the Standards for Internal Control in the Federal Government, also known as the Green Book. The second one is Internal Control Integrated Framework, Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission. Both of these books, you could Google them. It is available online, and it has a lot of good information on assisting you with reviewing and updating your internal controls. So now let's talk about some standards of cost. Now, in the order of precedence, I mentioned the 2 CFR 200, and one of the things the 2 CFR 200 does establishes the principles for determining costs for your grants. Now, as you're managing your grant program, it is important for you to know the standards that must be met before you charge a cost to your federal award. And I say federal award because the standards of cost in the 2 CFR 200, again, applies across the board to all federal programs, not just DOJ. So in order to charge a cost to your particular award or grant program, a cost must be first be allowable to be charged. Now, 2 CFR 200, again, determine the standards for costs for federal awards. The 2 CFR 200, along with the DOJ Grants Financial Guide, identifies some costs that are allowable with all awards, as well as costs that may be unallowable. Your particular grant solicitation and the terms and conditions of awards will also specify some additional items that you may or may not be able to charge to your particular grant. So it's always important that as you're applying for awards, that you have read through the solicitation because it may be pertinent information in there as you're determining what cost you're going to charge to your particular award. The standards also say a cost should be necessary. So when we say necessary, we mean those costs that must occur in order to operate your program, such as staff salaries. Now you have employees that work on your grant, and without them, you would not be able to implement your particular grant program. So it is necessary to be able to pay them. The standards of costs also say your costs should be reasonable. Those costs should not exceed what a prudent person would pay in the same situation or a cost that is generally recognized as an ordinary expense for its type. The standards also say a cost should be allocable, basically meaning it provides a benefit to your particular grant program. And a cost should be treated consistently. So now there are two things that I'm referring to when I say a cost should be treated consistently. Now, your policies and procedures on how costs should be treated should be consistently applied. In other words, federal costs should be consistently treated the same as any non-federal costs you have within your organization. Additionally, costs should be consistent in its treatment as to whether it's a direct or indirect cost. In other words, if a cost is treated as a direct cost and the cost is incurred for the same person, then that cost should now not be treated as an indirect cost. If you're treating the cost as a direct cost and you get another award, that same type of cost should be treated as a direct cost on that award. Also, your cost cannot earn you a profit, and your cost cannot be charged to a different award. So you cannot charge the exact same cost twice. Now, the question I usually get is, Angela, I have a person that's working on 3 different grants. Are you saying I can't pay them out of 3 different grants? The answer is yes, you can. A lot of organizations have multiple grant programs, and they may have the same people working across the board on those grant programs. So let's say, for example, your organization has 3 grant programs, and you have an individual within your organization that works on all 3 grant programs. Now, when you pay that person's salary and charge to the grant, you're not charging 100% of their salary to each one of their grants. You're charging a percentage of the salary based on how much time they're working on their grant program. So that's what we mean by only against one award and being able to divide it up. If you have somebody that's working on more than one award, that's just an example. One other last thing in standards of cost, if you're charging a cost, it not only has to be allowable under state laws and regulation, it also has to be allowable under federal laws and regulations. So going back to your internal controls, you want to make sure that when you're creating your policies and procedures, that you are incorporating some of the federal statutes and regulations within your policies and procedures as well. So let's talk of types of costs. A lot of times when you hear types of costs, most people think, oh, direct and indirect. So I'm gonna briefly talk about that, but those aren't the types we're gonna go over today. But for the record, a direct cost are those costs that can be identified specifically with a particular objective or cost activity. They may be your salaries and wages, travel costs, supplies, equipment, etc. Those are all types of direct costs. Indirect costs are those costs that are not readily identifiable to a particular project, but are necessary to the operation of your organization and the performance of your project. So indirect costs are not easily identifiable, but there's a mechanism for you to be able to charge indirect costs. There are two ways. In order to charge indirect costs to your award, you will need to have an approved and current indirect cost rate agreement from your cognizant federal agency, or you can elect to use the de minimis rate. The de minimis rate was one of the items that got updated in the 2 CFR 200 recently. The biggest change with the de minimis rate, previously, the de minimis rate was a percentage up to 10%. It's now being changed to 15%. So if you're using the de minimis rate starting October 1st, you're able to charge up to 15%, and that's 15% of modified total direct costs. Modified total direct costs are direct salaries and wages, applicable fringe benefits, materials and supplies, services, travel. And one other change to the 2 CFR 200, previously, you were able to include in modified total direct costs the first $25,000 of each subaward. Now it's the first $50,000 of each subaward. So types of costs. Again, I talked about allowability. Those costs that we said are necessary, reasonable, allocable. They are allowed under state and federal laws. And again, you can't earn a profit. But in addition to types of costs, let's look at unallowable costs. Unallowable costs, that's an easy definition, those costs that aren't allowed under your federal grant programs. Now, there are some costs that generally are unallowable across the board. That's buying land, fundraising, entertainment. Entertainment is one of those items that we will say it depends. It's a selected item of cost because sometimes there are grant programs that have it built in to allow you to spend grant money on entertainment costs. Again, you need to make sure you're reading your grant solicitation. Fundraising, contingencies, etc., all costs that are not allowable under grant funds. The next one is unauthorized costs. An unauthorized cost is a cost that OJP has not approved you to charge. Is a cost that is not in your approved budget, or a cost that you have not been approved to incur that occurs either before your grant program has started or after your grant program has ended. So basically, an unauthorized cost is a cost that you have not been approved to charge or incur against your award. Unsupported costs. See, this one goes back to documentation. So you want to make sure you have plenty of documentation of everything you're doing with your grant program. So an unsupported costs are those costs that you don't have the documentation to support charging those costs, i.e. invoices, etc. You have to have documentation for all your costs that you're charging. Unreasonable costs. So we talked about reasonable costs. So unreasonable costs is what? The opposite. Unreasonable costs are those costs that exceed what an ordinarily prudent person may have charged. Oh, look, we have another polling question. Okay. What type of cost is incurred when there is no consent from the awarding agency? A, unsupported. B, allowable. C, unreasonable. D, unallowable. Or E, unauthorized. Remember, we just talked about that. What type of cost is incurred when there is no consent from the awarding agency? A, unsupported. B, allowable. C, unreasonable. E, unauthorized. So we'll give you a few minutes to answer that question. What type of cost is incurred when there is no consent, meaning there is no approval from OJP for you to charge that particular cost? Is it A, unsupported, B, allowable, C, unreasonable, D, unallowable, or E, unauthorized? Okay, let's go look at the answers. What type of a cost is incurred when there is no consent from the awarding agency? The answer is unauthorized. Remember what we said about unauthorized cost? Is that cost that when you do not have consent or approval from the awarding agency? So let's talk about how you make changes to your award. And that would be done through a grant award modification. Now, there will be times during the life cycle of your award where your award may need to be modified or changed. Now, it's usually a financial change, programmatic change, etc. A grant award modification, we refer to as a GAM, is done in just grants with a grant award modification, or what we call a GAM. Now, depending on the GAM, it may be initiated by you, the grantee, or the award recipient, your OJP program manager, or someone in OCFO, the Office of the Chief Financial Officer. Now, there are three types of GAMs that we're going to look at. We have financial GAMs, we have project period extension GAMs, and we have programmatic GAMs. With financial GAMs, we have four subtypes. That's budget modification, budget reduction, sole source approval, and the budget clearance GAM. Now, the first one under financial GAM is the budget modification. The budget modification GAM is usually initiated by the award recipient whenever you need to make a change or you need to modify your approved budget. Now, one of the questions we get a lot is, what is the 10% rule? The 10% rule is associated with a budget modification. So for budget modification, you are allowed to move money between approved budget categories without submitting a GAM up to 10%. Once you have done 10% cumulative budget modifications or changes to your budget, then at that point, you're now required to submit a grant award modification or GAM. However, even though you may not be required to do a budget modification game until you reach that 10% cumulative amount, I always recommend do that game regardless. One, so you have established that audit trail and just grants. Two, to make sure your OJP grant manager or program manager knows exactly what's going on. So again, you may not be required to do a budget modification until you reach 10%, but I always recommend that you do one anyway. So again, you have that audit trail. Well, one thing I want to point out is regardless of that 10% rule, whenever you're moving money in and out of the indirect cost category, so basically whenever you're changing indirect costs, regardless of the 10% rule, you are always required to submit a GAM for a budget modification. Anytime you do a budget modification to a budget category that has $0 in it, you are always required to do a GAM. And the 10% rule is a 10% total of your award. Anytime, again, you're doing a budget modification and it's a $0 category. So let's say, for example, your approved budget didn't have anything allocated in travel. Your OJP program manager is telling you, well, I need you to go to this particular training, so you need to have money in the travel category. You currently don't have anything budgeted. So you're going to do a budget modification GAM, so you can move money from an approved budget category into the travel category, which previously didn't have any money in it. That's what I mean about a $0 budget category. Also, one thing to be mindful of whenever you're doing a budget modification, that may also require a programmatic GAM for a scope change. So a lot of times where you're changing that budget, your OJP program manager may say, hey, while you're changing this budget, you just changed the scope of your program, so now you need to do a scope change GAM. That's why it's always important to make sure you stay in contact with your program manager so they know what's going on, because they will make the decision of whether or not your budget modification will require a change for a scope GAM. Budget reduction. Budget reduction is usually a GAM that's done internally whenever we need to make changes to your actual award amount. Budget modification reduction GAM. Budget reduction GAM is rarely done, but again, that's something that is done internally with an OJP. The next one is sole source approval GAM. So let's say you've gone through the procurement process for competitive bidding and you work successful, and now you're going to choose to use a sole source because that's the only way you can get your contract done. If you're using a sole source over $250,000 or more, then you are required to get a sole source approval and provide a justification as to why you're using a sole source. That's also a financial GAM. The next GAM is a budget clearance GAM. Now, the budget clearance GAM is issued or submitted by someone in the office of the Chief Financial Officer, OCFO. So generally, during the application season, OCFO is reviewing your budgets. However, because of the number of applications we receive, there's not enough time to actually completely review all budgets in its entirety. So what we'll do is we will decide whether or not we're going to approve you for a particular award. We'll go ahead and issue an award notification. However, we'll conditionally clear your budget. And when I say we'll conditionally clear it, we'll issue your award, but we'll put a special condition on your award saying that you cannot obligate, expend, or draw down any funds until someone from the Office of the Chief Financial Officer has reviewed and approved your budget. So generally what happens is after the award season ends, which it did on September 30th, October 1, we immediately started going into Just Grants and start reviewing all those budgets that we gave a conditional clearance on. So generally what happens is we'll initiate a GAM, we'll start reviewing your budget. If we have questions or we need additional information from you, we'll do a change request to you and Just Grants, sending your budget back, asking for additional information, updates, or changes. We always encourage you to respond back within 4 to 5 days, because the longer it takes for you to respond back on your budget, the longer it's going to take for us to finish our review, approve it, so you can start spending your grant funds. Additionally, if we do send your budget back to you requesting additional information or asking questions, and if for some reason you are unsure of what information we're looking for, please immediately reach out to your OJP program manager to get additional information. Because again, our goal is to get your budgets approved as soon as possible so you can start spending your grant funds. The next type of GAM we're going to talk about is the Project Period Extension Grant, GAM, also referred to as a no-cost extension. The Project Period Extension GAM, you will submit a GAM for that when you want to extend the end date of your award. Now, if you're going to submit a Project Period Extension GAM, you want to do that at least 30 days prior to the end date of your award. The rule of thumb is, as soon as you know you're going to need an extension to your award, you want to go ahead and request that extension. You are allowed one project period extension without a justification. Any project period extension request after the first one, you're going to need to provide a justification, and it'll get signed off on your OJP program manager before it is approved. And additional project period extension GAMs, because you're required to provide a justification and it requires more levels of approval, it's going to take a little bit longer to get approved. So just be mindful of that. So anything after the first project period extension GAM, you need to provide a justification with that request. The next type of GAMs we're going to talk about is the programmatic GAMs. So I kind of mentioned the scope change GAM. Whenever you're changing your budget and your program manager comes back and says, hey, you're changing your budget, but you're kind of changing the scope of your program, then guess what? They're going to have you submit a scope change GAM to go along with that budget modification GAM. That is one of the programmatic GAMs. Anytime you have any programmatic costs, such as paying a consultant higher than a consultant threshold of $650 for an 8-hour day, that will require a programmatic cost GAM. Anytime you are requesting prior approval from anything with your award through your program office, then that's going to require a programmatic GAM. So let's briefly talk about, program requirements. I kind of briefly mentioned them a few minutes ago. Now, as an award recipient, you are required to submit both financial and performance reports. And depending on your award, you may have additional reporting requirements, such as for FADA or conference cost reporting. Now, both your financial report and performance reports are submitted in Just Grant systems, and both reports show the status of your program. Your financial report is called the SF-425 or the Federal Financial Report. The FFR report shows the actual funds that you have spent and any invoices or bills that have not been paid yet, your unliquidated obligations. The FFR report is submitted on a quarterly basis, and it shows your cumulative expenditures on your award. Now, although your expenditures are cumulative, the indirect costs on your award are, when a report is currently reported on a quarterly basis. The FFR report is due 30 days after the last day of each quarter. If that report is delinquent in just grants, then guess what? You will not be able to draw down funds in ASAP until your report is current. Unfortunately, the day after your report is late, the system automatically will freeze your funds. One thing I want you to keep in mind is that when you first accept your award, you're usually not accepting your award on the begin date of your program, which means guess what? You may already have an FFR report due during that time period, the time period of the start date of the actual start date of your award, and when you actually receive notification from us that you are receiving that award. So once you accept your award, you will start receiving email notifications that you have a delinquent report. Again, delinquent reports are automatic, but like I said, a lot of times you're receiving your award after the award date, and it may be a FFR due date during that time period. So you're going to receive that those emails. Your assigned financial manager, all they will need to do is to go and adjust for grants. And even though you have not spent any of your grant funds yet, you will need to submit a $0 report. The final FFR report is due at the end of your award, or should I say, after you've completed everything with your award. So you will be completing that final FFR report after the end date of your award during the closeout period. Performance reports, they were previously called progress reports, are submitted in Just Grants. They show the performance and status of, should I say, the programmatic status of your activities for your particular program. Then your program office that's issued you a particular award determines the requirements for your performance or programmatic report. Most performance or programmatic reports are due semi-annually and are due 30 days after the end date of the reporting period. Generally, one of the special conditions on your award will tell you when your programmatic reports are due. It's also listed in your special conditions as far as the reporting requirements. Your performance or programmatic reports are, once you submit it, are reviewed by your program manager, and just like your FFR report, if that programmatic report is delinquent, guess what? Your grant funds will be put on hold. So we are down to our last topic. 2 CFR Part 200, Subpart F, Audit of Non-Federal Entities Expending Federal Awards. So 2 CFR Subpart F, we usually refer to this as the single audit, applies to all non-federal entities. So if your organization is receiving grant funds and you've expended $1 million or more in federal grant funds during your organization's fiscal year, guess what? You're required to have a single audit done. Your single audit reports are due within 9 months after the end of your organization's fiscal year, and they are submitted to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. If you have question costs of $15,000 or more, they must be included in your single audit report. So this slide here just shows, remember I talked about audit trails earlier? Just shows an example of an audit trail. This is one in particular, is an audit trail of the personnel and payroll information. So when they do an audit of this, the auditor is probably going to look at who you have working with your organization, how they're being paid, their hours. They might want to look at personnel files to see if maybe those people are actually qualified for that job. And believe it or not, they may ask to see the employee themselves, because we have run into organizations that will have staff members or personnel on their payroll that don't actually work there. The auditor is probably going to look at, again, what they're being paid, how they're being paid, and how you're documenting it. Your timesheets, for example, your payroll reports. They're going to look at how you're posting your payroll information to your accounting system. Are you posting it on a timely basis? Are you posting it correctly? They're going to look and see if what you have in your accounting system matches what you have on your FFR report. And then they're going to look to see how much you drew down to take care of your payroll cost. Just an example of an audit trail. So your single audit report, again, is submitted to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. The Federal Audit Clearinghouse is online. You will submit the entire package, and guess what? If your single audit report is late, or should I say, if you're required to have a single audit done and that report is late, meaning it's not in within 9 months after the end of your organization's fiscal year, then that audit report is going to be considered delinquent and your funds may be frozen. This is just the URL for the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. They also have a phone number and an email address. And again, if it's delinquent, your funds may be held. They do give you a grace period. They're not going to withhold your funds immediately, but be mindful of, you want to make sure you get that report in on time. So generally what happens after your single audit is done, we have an office within OJP called the Office of Audit, Assessment, and Management, OAAAM. OAAAM reviews the single audit reports for OJP grantees. They will look to see if there are any issues on that audit report and create an audit file and begin analyzing them. If there are any findings on your single audit report, guess what? You need to have a corrective action plan or a CAP. So they're going to reach out to you with your issues, and you'll be required to submit a corrective action plan or a CAP on how you're going to resolve those issues. So for the CAP, you need to discuss each finding, what you're going to do, or the steps you're going to take to resolve or correct any of those findings, a timetable on when you're correcting it, and how you're going to monitor it to make sure the correction took and then is maintained. So let's look at some of the top audit findings for the previous year. And we find that some of these findings, we see the same things year after year, which is why some of these are topics that we discussed today. Like the first one, procedures not documented or needed improvement. Remember what I said earlier? It's not important to have your internal controls and policies and procedures in place. You need to have them. You need to review them. You need to test them to make sure that they're working. You are required to have policies and procedures that specifically address on how you manage your federal grant programs. Number two, financial and program reports are not accurate. This goes back to having that adequate financial management system and having that documentation. So all of your information that you are using to complete your financial reports and your programmatic reports should be coming directly out of your accounting system. So again, you want to make sure that when you're entering stuff in your accounting system, that you're entering in correct and accurate data, so that when you're completing your reports, you are getting accurate data to put, or accurate information to put on your reports. Number 3, special conditions not met by grantee. If you have special conditions on your award that you're not sure how to resolve them, that's when you want to reach out to your OJP program manager to make sure that you have cleared all of your special conditions by the time you close out your award. Number 4 and 5, question costs. Unsupported, unallowable. We just talked about unsupported costs and unallowable costs. Unsupported costs goes back to what we talked about, making sure you have plenty of documentation as you're managing your particular grant program. Question costs unallowable. Again, we talked about the standards of costs. You need to make sure you're understanding what costs you're allowed to charge to your grant. Make sure you've read through your particular grant solicitation. You check the financial guide, et cetera, to make sure you're not charging unallowable costs to your award. 6 and 7 and 8 all kind of go hand in hand. Drawdowns not adequately supported, matching funds not provided or inadequately supported, procurement not supported. All this goes back to having plenty of documentation. Your documentation and audit trail should tell exactly what's going on in your organization. It should tell the story. So you want to make sure you have plenty of documentation to support all of your award activities. Number 9, suspension and debarment list. One of the things you should have incorporated in your policies and procedures is checking the suspension and debarment list. So if you're going through the procurement process, or if you're awarding subawards, you need to make sure that you are checking the suspension and debarment list. The suspension and debarment list is also called the excluded list of parties. The suspension and debarment list is a list of organizations or individuals that the federal government does not do business with for one reason or another. In order to check the suspension and debarment list, you would go to www.sam.gov, and you could do a search there to see whether or not an organization or individual you're trying to do business with is on that list. So again, you want to make sure that is incorporated in your policies and procedures. Number 10, accounting system inadequate or not effectively utilized. We talked about that at the beginning, making sure you have an adequate financial management system. You're tracking your awards separately from other funding sources. You have established that audit trail. You are documenting, recording, and reporting on your drawdowns, your grant funds, your match, your program income, your subawards, your contracts, equipment, etc. So make sure that if you do have an accounting system or financial system in place, that you actually know how to use it and you're using it effectively. Getting through the maze. We always tell you, whenever you're unsure about what you're doing with your grant program, please reach out to us, because our goal is to help you. We want you to be on track. We want you to be successful in managing your particular grant program. We've come to the end of our presentation. Now we're at this section for questions, and hopefully I will have answers for you.
Okay. The first question, who would be expected to attend the in-person training? A financial manager only?
The in-person training, I'm gonna put it this way, the in-person training or the online training is required for your financial managers. It is a special condition in your award that your financial managers are required. Now, it could be in person or the online training, but keep in mind The in-person fills up quickly. So you want to make sure if you want to go to the in-person training, if you're required to, then when the registration opens, you want to register as soon and as early as you possibly can.
But also the GA. In the special condition, the GA, the grant award administrator
Oh,
is
thank you.
responsible.
The grant award administrator is also required. So the grant award administrator and the financial manager is required to take the training. It does not have to be in person. They could do the online training as well.
Are there any accounting software systems that are recommended for use?
We don't have a list of software systems. We always say, if you have an accountant within your organization, talk to your organization's accountant and talk to some of the other grantees that you know that don't or online with this training to see maybe if they could offer you some of the systems that use that helps them with their grant program.
Is Kiana on?
Yes, I'm here.
Next question is for you. Is it possible to get assistance with ASAP to return a payment via wire? Long
Yes, I
story.
responded.
Oh,
Sorry.
you did? Okay. Okay.
No, for that one, I did respond directly to her and provided her the ask.ocfo email box, and we'll be happy to assist her in doing the return in ASAP.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Do you have any recommendations on resources an organization could use to help guide drafting and or updating internal control policy and procedures?
Yes, if you have a copy of this presentation, if you go back to the internal control section, I had that one slide there that had the two guides listed, the Green Book and the COSO guide. You could Google that, and both of those guides has a ton of information on internal controls, drafting, updating, etc.
Is the de minimis rate allowed for county government?
The de minimis rate for county government, you know what, I'm going to have to check on that specifically as far as county government.
Is it 10% of budget line or 10% of total?
So when it comes to the 10% rule, you're looking at the 10% of the total award, but then as you're moving money around, you're looking at the categories too. So basically, it is both. You're looking at the 10% of the total award and the 10% of each budget line item that you're moving.
If we do move less than 10%, should we notify our program manager via email as heads up? This would provide a written trail.
If you do move less than 10% during your budget modification, it's always a good rule of thumb to reach out to your program manager and let them know what you're doing with your budget modification. So again, that would establish your audit trail by sending them an email.
Do you not send sole source approval for a sole source contract less than $250,000?
For sole source, less than $250,000, you do not need to provide a justification or get approval. Only for those that are $250,000 or more do you need approval.
You mentioned that federal financial report, quarterly reports should include cumulative expenses, but only quarterly indirect costs. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, that is correct. So the indirect cost you're showing on that report is just what you incurred for that particular quarter. But all your other expenses are cumulative.
Or did you mean in-kind matches only reported as quarterly, not cumulative?
No, I meant indirect costs. Indirect costs. See, the thing you want to be mindful of when you're reporting your indirect costs on your report and you're reporting your cumulative expenditures, those indirect costs are already included in that cumulative cost. The indirect cost section in the FFR report is showing how much of your how much of your expenditures included indirect cost.
Kiana, I don't know if you answered this one already, but are there any trainings coming up for ASAP?
So if you sign up for one of the in-person trainings, we do cover ASAP in detail during that training, as well as provide on-hand technical assistance if it's needed with ASAP. Outside of that, Department of Treasury offers monthly free trainings. They're usually geared specifically to how to enroll. So if you're already enrolled, then that probably wouldn't be helpful. They also do one on how to request payments, which is probably more helpful. They're offered once a month. You can find those trainings on their website. And they're like about an hour or so long. They're not that time consuming, but those are offered monthly. Outside of that, specifically to DOJ awards and how we use ASAP, then you would want to come to one of our in-person trainings to get more in-depth ASAP training.
Which leads to the next question. When will the next in-person training be? Also, if you do not pass the first final test online, how can you retest?
The next in-person training is going to be scheduled for February. Once we have the dates, exact dates finalized, you will receive an email notification letting you know the dates and when registration is opening up. Now, for the online tests, if you're taking the online training and you did not pass the first final test online, you have the opportunity to take the test a second time to see if you pass it. If you don't pass it a second time, guess what? After the second time, then you got to start the whole process and going through the online training again.
First timer, so I apologize if this is a stupid question, but after application submission, how long before an OJP program manager is assigned?
The OJP program manager is usually signed once the application is submitted in the system.
If our grant was issued more than 6 months ago, can the financial manager still complete the online training?
Yes, the financial manager can still complete the online training.
Okay. I don't think the 10% indirect rate can be both of the award and of the expenses. For example, 10% of $100,000 award is 10,000, which is more than 10% of the direct cost left.
Okay, let me clarify. We're back to the 10% rule again, I believe. And I'm sorry, I should have clarified before. This 10% rule does not apply for awards. Oh shit, I just lost my train of thought. Crystal, less than 250, I can't remember I'm sorry. I can remember the exact number. I want to say it's awards less than $250,000. The 10% rule does not apply.
I think it's 250.
It's 50, okay.
It's 250, yeah. When submitting financial gains, can the grant award administrator submit those or only the financial manager?
I'm gonna leave that question to our Just Grants person.
Elena?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, yes. So for when you're submitting a GAMs are submitted by the grant award administrator. Okay, so it'll just be your grant award administrator. All right.
How long are you certified after completing the in-person or online financial management training? 3 years.
Oh, I'm sorry. After completing the in-person or online financial training, your certification is good for 3 years. Now, going back to that, if you're a new grantee or your financial manager has left and you have a new financial manager, and in that case, they will have 120 days after being assigned or after accepting the award to complete the training. But once the training is completed, it's good for 3 years.
For those grants not yet awarded for 24-25 year, when can we expect notification of award?
We'll leave that to just grants.
Yelena?
Is that for the financial manager also being the entity administrator? Is that question there?
No, the question was for the grants not yet awarded for this fiscal year, when can we
Uh-huh.
expect notification of award?
Okay. So let's see here. Usually, the awards will come out, and let me get the specific. Usually everybody knows before the end of the year, but I'm trying to get the specific month. Let's see here. Let me get back to you, but usually they should know by the end of the year if you've been awarded. But I will get that for you and I will post it in the chat.
Is it permissible for your award administrator to also be your financial manager?
I was gonna answer that one too. All right, so yes, users can have more than one role assigned to them. All right, so if your entity administrator needs to participate in managing the award, they can be assigned that financial manager role as well.
If the grant award administrator and or the financial manager attends the advanced training, will that restart the 3-year effective date?
The advanced financial management training is not a required training, and it has nothing to do with your certification. So to answer your question, the advanced training does not restart the 3-year effective date for your certification.
I took the online final test once, test number 1 once. I got a 60 out of 100, and it says a 70 out of 100 is required to pass. It says no more attempts allowed. How can I get a second attempt?
We're gonna have to get your contact information and find out what's going on. Because generally, if you don't pass it the first time, it should allow you to take it a second time. So is something must be going on with that system right there. So let's make sure we get your contact information before you log off. You wanted to put it in the
chat.
Can you put your contact information in the chat? And we'll check on that for you.
How much time
sorry.
does a new, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry about that, Crystal. I was just going to say I had an answer for you for that one question about the for the grants not awarded. All right, so typically the awards, if you have been awarded a grant, you will be notified by September 30th of that prior fiscal year. Now, if you didn't receive that award, then everyone who will apply for that will be notified by December 30th. Okay, so I hope that was helpful.
How much time does a new finance director have to complete the training online after they begin employment?
A new finance director, once they have been added into the Just Grant system and assigned as the finance manager or finance director, then they have 120 days after that to complete the training or to get certified.
When I am in the online financial management training, every half hour or so, it stops and I have to restart my computer. Does anyone else have this happen? I'm afraid this will happen during my exam, which will cause me to fail. Any suggestions? Drop the information in the chat.
Can you put your information in the chat and we could work with you one-on-one on that?
How do we access the required financial training to get certified?
So for the required financial training, you can either register to take it in person, which will start back the in-person training in February, or you could take it online. And a link to the online training is at the beginning of this PowerPoint presentation.
If the grant was awarded previously with different people employed at the time who took the training, the new employees working with the grant need to complete the online training or attend in person.
If the new employees working with the grant is the assigned award administrator and the assigned financial administrator for that particular award, then they are required to take the training and they can take it online.
For equipment tracking, is there a minimal equipment cost that requires tracking or anything brought within an equipment category?
The rule of thumb is any equipment that you bought with your grant funds, you should have some kind of tracking system in place for that equipment.
What is the specific training required for the entity administrator? I don't have a-
So, can you hear me? We actually have entity management training on Tuesdays, and that is a training that we highly recommend for people to attend to learn more about the entity administrator role and how to manage your entity in Just Grants. We actually just had that session on Tuesday, and I'll post it in the chat. But you can go to our Just Grants site, training site, and sign up for the next one.
Yelena, how many financial managers are allowed for one award?
One. One financial manager per award.
I think Angie just spoke about this question. How do we find the required training for certification? The online training hasn't been updated since 2020. How do new people know what information is outdated or incorrect? We updated it now.
We are in the process of updating the online training. So you shouldn't be worried about it. Whatever's on there is perfectly acceptable right now. If there were small changes, we would have went in and made any small changes or added any comments, but it is in the process of being updated, so don't worry. You're about to have a more updated training with the updated information from the 2 CFR 200.
Someone asked, are we supposed to be seeing answers in the chat box? I cannot see any.
No, because we're answering the questions out loud unless some of our panelists have already answered your questions, specific questions in the chat.
How long should it take to receive a response to a GAM? We submitted GAM 597737 on August 28th, 24, and to date have not received a response. The chronological list of actions taken in Just Grant shows that the last action was taken at NIJ on 9/30/24.
To answer your question, sometimes it depends on the type of GAM you submitted. Like, for example, we just finished grant application season last month, and project period extension GAMs were one of the things that got put on hold while we were processing applications or budgets. But a lot of times, when processing the GAM, it all depends on what the GAM is for. But I'm writing down your GAM number, and I'm going to see if I can look into it. And can you drop your information in the chat for me so we can get back to you on that?
After receiving the award, we wanted to grant Just Grants access to the PI. We currently have an entity administrator, authorized representative, grant award administrator, and a financial manager. Can we add the PI?
That's correct.
Yelena. Yelena.
There we go. Can you, there we go. I was trying to get off the mute button. Okay, so
They currently have an entity administrator, authorized rep,
mhm.
grant award administrator, and a financial manager. And I'm assuming they want to add the PI into one of these roles or add the PI? And they're asking, can they?
Okay, and
And then
forgive me,
grant,
the PI is the, hold on.
what do they call? Oh my
Just want to
God.
make sure.
They like the project,
Oh, so that's just a person, that's just a title for someone in their organization? Oh, okay.
yes.
Okay. So, well, if that's the case, then they can certainly they can add them, but they would just have to again, so they already have the authorized representative. Okay, so if they added them, it would have to be, you know, maybe as like an application submitter. But again, it would limit the things that they would see. Or they would have to replace one of the authorized, you know, one of the other roles with that person.
Are the roles limited? I mean, like, I've seen more than one financial manager, more than one grant award administrator.
So for the grant award administrator, you can see, so there's an alternate grant award administrator. So, you
Okay.
know, there's the grant award administrator and you have an alternate, but there's only the one financial manager.
Okay.
Hopefully that was helpful. Did that answer all of the questions for that one?
I think so.
Okay, awesome.
Okay. We still must justify our choice to sole source, even if the threshold amount is under 250,000, correct?
If you're using a sole source under $250,000, you do not need to get a prior approval and provide a justification. Now, if that particular contract ends up going over $250,000, the same contract down the road, then guess what? Then you'll have to come in and get a prior approval or justify, but as long as it's under $250,000, you don't.
What do you do if you have an NIJ GMS who is unresponsive to PI questions?
If you have a grant manager that's non-responsive, what you want to do is you want to go to the NIJ webpage on the DOJ site and call their direct number and ask to speak to that individual supervisor because you're not getting any responses.
Yelena, can a financial manager and grant award administrator be the same person?
Yes, because there can be more than one role assigned to a user.
The person that was doing the FFR reporting is no longer with us. What website would I need to go to submit this last quarter's reporting? Would think they
The
would have to
person,
reassign. I think
yeah,
they
they
would
were
have
gonna
to
have to
reassign.
reassign.
Right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I think they would have to reassign someone in the
That
organization as the financial manager.
financial manager, exactly. That is correct.
And
So
and
once
who
they
does
do
the
that, then they can go
reassignment?
ahead and yep, once they reassign it, then they can go ahead and submit the last quarter report.
Now, Yelena, would that be the entity administrator that would do the reassignment?
Yes, only the entity administrator can reassign roles.
I'm not sure. This person said, will it be updated within 120 days? For example, the new 15%.
Craig, are you talking about the online training?
Yes, that's what, yeah. Yes, it should be updated within 120 days and it will reflect the 15% rate changes de minimis, I'm assuming.
Yes.
So it will reflect the new changes in the 2 CFR. Our trainer is currently working on those updates as we speak. Okay, I think you just answered this one, Elena. How many grant award managers can you have?
Yeah. So there's the grant award administrator and there's a supportive role. It's an alternate grant award administrator.
Okay. And our last two questions. Angie, can you repeat the rule for sole source?
So for sole source, if you've gone through the competitive bidding process and you weren't successful, or the service you're trying to procure is only available from a single source, you may be able to use the sole source. Now, the rule is if you're using a sole source that's $250,000 or more, you're required to provide a justification for using sole source. And there is a list of information you need to include in that sole source justification in the DOJ financial guide, and you need to get prior approval with that sole source justification. And you would do that through a financial GAM and Just Grants.
So does sole source apply to any vendor we are paying grant funds to for work on the program? For example, we pay a software company out of grant funds for their technology. If we give that company more than 250 from our grant award, do we need to submit a sole source GAM?
So sole source basically is when you're trying to procure a service or a contract or equipment, et cetera, from an organization, and that equipment or service, et cetera, is only available through that particular organization, meaning they're the only ones that provide this information or this type of service. That's what makes them a sole source. Now, if your sole source contract is $250,000 or more, doesn't mean when you pay them, it's mean when you have that contract, then if you have a contract of $250,000 or more, that's when you need to submit a sole source GAM.
I'm gonna add the last question. What if the grant is under 250?
What if the grant is under 250? I'm not sure if that is a sole source question. If you're using a sole source under $250,000, then you are not required to get a prior approval or provide a justification.
So last question is the mandated financial training required for the alternate grant award administrator as well?
The financial training is required only for the main grant award administrator and the main financial award administrator.
Say something about the sole source too.
Yes, sir. Which way, sir?
Can I say something about the sole source requirements too?
Sure.
So although if it's under 250,000, you won't need an approval for us, you would still need to have documented procedures for any sole source transaction that's over the micro purchase threshold, which is about 50. So if it's under 50, generally you can use an informal procedure, but anything over 50,000, you still have to justify it and have a process around how you justify a sole source. But over 250, you got to get the green light from DOJ, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Trey.
Do the procurement conditions only apply to subrecipients or contractors to provide services? Or do the procurement conditions also apply to purchasing equipment?
I'm not quite sure I understand this question. We're going to get back to that question. That is correct. You cannot just use sole source just because you want to, so no.
Alternate grant administrator would need to complete the training if they are helping to manage the award. I mean, it's not mandatory, they can.
The alternate grant administrator can take the training, they're just not required to. Before we go ahead and close out, are there any other questions?
I have one. Trayvon, so there was a question about the online training and they wanted to know, will it be completed within the next 120 days?
Yeah, I heard the question. So yes, we're literally working on it right this second. So we're talking to the vendor, we're going back and forth, so we're in process.
Thank
And
you,
the
Trey.
Yeah, and the DOJ guide is ready now too. So we're just finishing up the final touches, and it should be ready probably within the week.
Thank you. And one good thing about what Trey mentioned about the DOJ Grants Financial Guide being updated, there's always a section in that guide that will show you exactly what changes were made, so you don't have to thumb through the guide looking for those changes unless you just want to. But we want to thank you for attending today's training. Please take a few moments to complete our evaluation. You can either click on the link in the chat box or use the QR code that's currently shown on the screen. We do appreciate you taking your time out, your busy day, to join us. Hopefully we will see you, if we haven't seen you already, see you in the future at our in-person training. Again, if you can't come in person, please feel free to take the online training. But we would definitely love to see you in person, because if you've been to our in-person training before, we have changed locations. So we're in a nicer, more modern facility at this present time. So we would love for you to see our new location.
You could, the temporary, it does not apply to awards of less than 250,000. I just found it.
Okay, and just to verify, the 10% rule does not apply to awards that's under $250,000. Our new office is still in DC. It's like 10 minutes from where we were previously located. And please, again, thank you for coming out. I hope the information you heard today was helpful to you. Again, also, if you have any financial questions after this seminar, I don't have it on the slide presentation, but please feel free to email me at angela.wade, that's WADE, @usdoj.gov. Or you can always reach out to our OCFO Customer Service Center. And please enjoy the rest of your day. Again, thank you for coming out.